My name is Olivia Parker, though most people call me Liv. And until last month, I thought I had finally figured out how to balance my family relationships and my own happiness. As an interior designer with my own small but growing business in Chicago, I had created a life I was genuinely proud of, especially considering I'd done it with minimal support or encouragement. So when my phone lit up with my mother's name one Tuesday evening after nearly 3 months of radio silence, I was surprised, to say the least. "Olivia, darling," my mother's voice carried that familiar lilt that always preceded a request. "Your father and I would love it if you could come home this weekend for dinner. It's been too long, and we have some family matters to discuss." The warmth in her tone was unusual, almost rehearsed, but I immediately felt a flutter of hope. Maybe they had finally started to see me as an adult with my own valid path. Perhaps they were ready to bridge the distance that had grown between us since I chose a creative career instead of following my siblings into what my father called respectable professions. My brother James is a cardiothoracic surgeon, and my sister, Rebecca, is a corporate lawyer with an office overlooking Lake Michigan. Meanwhile, I transformed spaces into homes, and somehow that never quite measured up. But this call felt different. I packed a weekend bag with care, even including my portfolio and recent design magazine feature. During the 2-hour drive to my hometown of Oak Ridge, I rehearsed stories of my recent success with a major hotel renovation and the design award I'd received last quarter. As I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home, I noticed fresh flowers in the window boxes and new landscaping. The house looked impeccable, more so than usual, as if they were expecting important guests rather than just their middle child. I smoothed my dress, took a deep breath to calm my nerves, and rang the doorbell to the house where I grew up, but never quite belonged. The door swung open to reveal my mother, perfectly coiffed in a cream cashmere sweater, wearing the pearl earrings that Dad had given her on their 30th anniversary. "Olivia, you look well," she said, her eyes quickly scanning my outfit, with the subtle assessment I'd grown accustomed to over the years. My father appeared behind her, offering a stiff half-hug and a pat on the shoulder. "Right on time for once," he commented with what might have been intended as teasing, but landed like all his other small jabs. The house smelled of pot roast, my favorite childhood meal, which struck me as oddly thoughtful. As we settled into the living room with drinks before dinner, my mother launched into updates about James's recent promotion at the hospital and Rebecca's successful court case for a high-profile client. "James and Elizabeth just put in an offer on that beautiful Tudor in Lakeview Estates," my mother gushed, "and Rebecca's little Sophia is already reading at a 5th-grade level." When there was finally a pause, I excitedly shared news of my design, award, and the feature in Architectural Digest. "That's nice, dear," my mother said, glancing at my father. "Speaking of magazines, did you see that James was quoted in Medical Innovation Monthly?" Throughout dinner, this pattern continued, my small successes immediately overshadowed by my siblings' apparently more significant achievements. I noticed my parents exchanging glances several times, a silent communication system I'd never been privy to. After dessert, my father cleared his throat. "Olivia, your mother and I would like to discuss something important with you in my study." His tone was formal, reminiscent of childhood scoldings. In the wood-paneled room that had always intimidated me, I noticed legal documents spread across his desk, the words "Last Will and Testament" visible on the top page. My stomach tightened. "We've been doing some financial planning," my father began, suddenly interested in straightening his pen set. "As you know, we've always believed in being transparent about family matters." My mother's smile seemed plastered on, her eyes not matching the expression. "We've finalized our will," my father continued, "and we wanted to inform you personally of our decisions." He shuffled papers importantly before looking up. "We've decided that our estate will be divided between James and Rebecca upon our passing." He paused, watching me carefully. "The fact is, they both have children to consider, educational funds to manage. You've chosen a different path, without the same responsibilities." I sat perfectly still, my mind struggling to process his words. "So I get nothing," I finally managed. "We've raised you, provided an education, given you opportunities," my mother interjected, her voice honeyed yet firm. "James and Rebecca simply have greater needs with their families. We're sure you understand." But I didn't understand. Not why they'd summoned me to dinner specifically to tell me I was being disinherited. Not why they looked at me expectantly, as if waiting for my gratitude for their transparency, and certainly not why. After years of unequal treatment, this final statement of their preference still had the power to devastate me so completely. The drive back to my hotel that night was a blur, windshield wipers battling a sudden downpour that matched my internal storm. I'd declined their offer to stay in my old bedroom, mumbling something about early meetings tomorrow. The truth was, I couldn't bear to sleep under their roof, surrounded by photos documenting my siblings' achievements, while the few featuring me were relegated to hallways or bookshelves in the basement. As I navigated the rain-slicked roads, my parents' words replayed in my mind, mixing with memories that suddenly took on new significance. Christmas when I was 12. James receiving an expensive microscope, Rebecca getting a laptop, and me unwrapping art supplies from a discount store. My high school graduation, my parents throwing an elaborate party but spending most of it introducing James to medical school contacts. My college years, struggling with student loans while learning later that my siblings' educations had been fully funded. "You're more independent," my mother had said when I questioned the disparity. "We knew you could handle it." I pulled into the hotel parking lot and sat with the engine running, rain drumming on the roof as I pulled out my phone. Maya answered on the second ring, her voice instantly shifting from sleepy to alert when she heard my breathing. "Liv? What? Happened?" The dam broke. Between sobs, I explained the dinner, the will, the casual way they'd announced my exclusion. "Those absolute monsters," Maya hissed, her fury on my behalf oddly comforting. "You need to confront them. Demand an explanation beyond that nonsense about your siblings having kids." But the thought of confrontation made my chest tighten. I'd spent my entire life as the peacekeeper, smoothing ruffled feathers, accepting less to keep the harmony. "What if they're right?" I whispered. "What if I don't deserve an equal share? I don't have children to provide for." Maya's response was immediate. "Stop that right now. This isn't about money and you know it. This is about them continuing to treat you as less than your siblings." After we hung up, I lay awake in the impersonal hotel room, staring at the ceiling. Morning brought a text from my mother. "Brunch with everyone at Rosewood Cafe tomorrow at 11. James and Rebecca are so excited to see you." I nearly canceled, but something stopped me. A need for closure, perhaps, or the masochistic desire to understand just how deep this family fracture went. I spent the day wandering my hometown, past my old high school where art class had been, my sanctuary, the local gallery where I'd had my first exhibition that my parents had attended only briefly before leaving for one of James's basketball games. By evening, I'd made my decision. I would attend brunch, face my siblings, and try to understand if they were complicit in this division or merely beneficiaries of my parents' inexplicable preference. The Rosewood Cafe was busy with a Sunday brunch crowd when I arrived, spotting my family already seated at a corner table by the windows. Rebecca saw me first, waving with the practiced elegance that had always seemed effortless for her. As I approached, I noted the perfect tableau they created. My father reviewing the menu with serious consideration, my mother adjusting her scarf just so, James checking his expensive watch, and Rebecca somehow looking simultaneously casual and impeccable in designer casual wear. I, in comparison, felt rumpled despite having spent extra time on my appearance that morning. "There she is," my father announced unnecessarily as I took the empty seat beside Rebecca. James reached across to squeeze my shoulder, a gesture that might have seemed affectionate to onlookers but barely concealed his usual condescension. "The prodigal artist returns," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How's business? Still decorating apartments?" Before I could correct his deliberate minimizing of my work, my mother jumped in. "James just received a research grant, his third this year, and Rebecca's firm is handling the Westmore merger. Coffee's arrived, and I noticed James and Rebecca exchanging a glance as my father cleared his throat. "I assume Mom and Dad told you about the estate planning," Rebecca said, stirring sweetener into her latte. The casual way she brought it up made my stomach drop. "You knew?" I asked, looking between them. "Well, of course," James replied, spreading jam on his toast with surgical precision. We've been helping them organize their affairs for months now. Frankly, it makes the most sense this way. You've never been good with money anyway, Liv. Rebecca nodded in agreement. It's not like you have college funds to worry about. My Sophia is already showing signs of brilliance, and Michael will likely follow his father into medicine. My parents sat silently, allowing my siblings to explain why I deserved less consideration, as if it were the most logical conclusion in the world. I have a mortgage too, I said quietly, and I'm establishing a business. James laughed, the sound grating. Come on, Liv. Your little design shop hardly compares to our financial responsibilities. You live in that tiny condo and drive a car that's what, 10 years old? A memory surfaced. My college graduation, asking my parents for help with the security deposit on my first apartment. They'd given me $300 and a lecture about fiscal responsibility, while funding the down payment on Rebecca's first home as a graduation gift. I excused myself to the restroom, locking the door and gripping the sink as I fought back tears. The face in the mirror looked foreign, flushed with hurt and anger I rarely allowed myself to express. I splashed cold water on my cheeks and reapplied lipstick with shaking hands. By the time I returned, my father was in the middle of announcing a family vacation to Tuscany planned for next summer. We've reserved a beautiful villa that can accommodate all of us, including the grandchildren, he was saying. My mother nodded enthusiastically. It will be such quality family time. I waited for the invitation that never came. It was clear from their planning details that all of us didn't include me. When I finally found my voice and began to ask about whether I'd be joining, my father checked his watch and interrupted. Before we forget, James has some exciting news. And just like that, the conversation shifted to my brother's promotion, my question hanging unacknowledged in the air. After another 20 minutes of celebrating my siblings while ignoring my existence, I murmured an excuse about work deadlines and stood to leave. Rebecca offered a distracted air kiss, already turning back to show my mother photos of Sophia's dance recital. My father was absorbed in his phone, and James merely waved without looking up. As I walked to my car, I realized they probably wouldn't notice if I never returned at all. I extended my hotel stay another day, unable to face the drive back to Chicago in my current emotional state. Sitting cross-legged on the bland hotel comforter, I opened the small box of childhood mementos I'd brought, hoping to remind myself of happier times. Inside was a stack of birthday cards, report cards, and faded photographs. I found myself organizing them chronologically, and a disturbing pattern emerged. In early family photos, I was centered between my siblings, my parents, hands resting proudly on my small shoulders. But gradually, my position shifted, to the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, sometimes partially cropped. There were school awards for art competitions with my father's cramped writing in the margins. Nice hobby, focus on science. A high school report card with straight A's had my mother's note. James had all A+ at your age. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Your mother and I expect you're being reasonable about our decision. Family harmony requires accepting what's fair. I didn't respond, instead opening my laptop to distract myself. A Facebook notification drew my attention. My mother had tagged James in a post celebrating his new vacation home in northern Michigan. So proud of our son's success. Your father and I were happy to help make this dream come true. The post included photos of my parents beaming in front of a stunning lakefront property. Curious now, I scrolled further and found another recent post congratulating Rebecca on her business expansion. Supporting our daughter's ambitions has always been our greatest joy. Proud investors in Rebecca Parker Legal Consulting. My hands began to shake. Their claims of limited resources that needed to be responsibly allocated to my siblings with children suddenly rang hollow. I found myself diving deeper, discovering a blog post from my mother's country club social group where she'd been interviewed about legacy planning. The quote that stabbed me. Eleanor Parker shared her philosophy that inheritance should recognize children who honor family traditions and values. We believe in leaving our legacy to worthy heirs who will carry forward what we've built, she explained. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts racing between memories reinterpreted through this new lens and anxiety about what the future held for my relationship with my family. By morning, I had developed a migraine and had no appetite. My phone showed missed calls from Maya and Sam, friends who had been checking in since hearing about the initial dinner disaster. I finally called Maya back, her steady voice grounding me as I described the brunch confrontation and my subsequent discoveries. Liv, I've known your family for 20 years, and I've watched them do this to you over and over, she said gently. At some point, you need to recognize this isn't about your worth. There's something broken in them, not you, Sam texted later. Remember that time your parents missed your gallery opening because James had a cold? It wasn't normal then, and this isn't normal now. Their perspectives helped, but I still felt compelled to have one final conversation with my parents to ask directly why they had always seen me as less deserving than my siblings. I needed to hear it plainly, without the cushioning of polite society phrases or deflections about financial planning. Before leaving town, I would meet them one last time, not seeking reversal of their decision, but understanding of how they could so consistently devalue their own daughter. I suggested meeting at Meridian Coffee Shop, neutral territory where we couldn't easily be overheard and where I wouldn't feel the power imbalance of their home. I arrived 20 minutes early, securing a corner table and rehearsing what I wanted to say. I had even written key points in my notebook, determined to remain calm and articulate rather than letting emotion overwhelm me as it often did in family confrontations. My parents arrived 15 minutes late, my mother immediately checking her watch and announcing, "We can only stay for 30 minutes. We have a commitment at the club." They hadn't even sat down yet, and already they were establishing that I wasn't worth their time. I took a steadying breath as they settled across from me, my father immediately signaling for service while my mother adjusted her scarf and jewelry. "I wanted to talk about your decision regarding the will," I began, carefully. "Not to change your minds, but to understand why you've always treated me differently from James and Rebecca." My father's expression hardened immediately. "I think you're overreacting to a perfectly sensible financial decision," he said, dismissing my entire premise. This is exactly the emotional response that confirms we made the right choice. My mother reached across to pat my hand, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. "Darling, you've always been so dramatic. Remember when you cried for days because we missed one of your little art shows? James never made such fuss when we couldn't attend every basketball game." I pulled my hand away, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that preceded tears. "It wasn't one show, Mom. You missed my college graduation exhibition, my first professional installation, and my design award ceremony. You've never missed anything of James's or Rebecca's." My father interrupted before I could continue. "We raised you, provided food and shelter and education. Legally and morally, we owe you nothing more. What we choose to do with our assets is entirely our decision." Something in his tone made me realize they'd already had this conversation with a lawyer, preparing for my potential objections. "This isn't about legal obligations," I tried again. "It's about why you've consistently shown James and Rebecca that they matter more to you than I do." My mother's expression shifted to practiced concern. "If you applied yourself the way your siblings have, perhaps you'd have a more successful career that would make us proud. Interior design is a lovely hobby, but hardly a profession worth the Parker name." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "I have a master's degree in design. I run a profitable business with employees who depend on me. I've been featured in national publications." My father waved this away. "Rebecca was made partner at 30. James saves lives daily. Your work is decorative." I tried once more, my voice quavering despite my best efforts. "Can you understand how painful it is to hear that nothing I do will ever measure up? That who I am is fundamentally disappointing to you?" My mother looked at my father, then back at me. "Other daughters call their mothers weekly, visit regularly, remember anniversaries without prompting. Perhaps if you'd been more attentive to family obligations, we might feel differently." The audacity of this statement, when they rarely returned my calls and had forgotten my birthday entirely last year, left me momentarily speechless. "I've tried so hard to maintain a relationship with you," I finally said. "I've accepted less attention, less support, less love my entire life, hoping eventually it would be enough. But it never will be, will it? My father checked his watch again and stood abruptly. I think we've heard enough. When you're ready to be reasonable and accept our decision gracefully, you can rejoin family activities. My mother gathered her purse, adding, "We hope you'll reflect on how your attitude affects family harmony." They left without waiting for my response, my father tossing bills on the table for their untouched coffees. The barista caught my eye with a sympathetic look as I sat alone, my carefully prepared notes now blurred by tears I refused to shed in public. The reconciliation I'd hoped for hadn't just failed. It had confirmed that nothing would ever change because my parents didn't see anything wrong with how they treated me. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into work, hoping routine would provide stability while I processed what had happened. But concentration eluded me. I stared at fabric swatches without seeing them, missed deadlines I'd never missed before, and found myself zoning out during client meetings. 2 weeks after the coffee shop conversation, I lost the Lakefront Hotel account when I submitted designs late and below my usual standard. My assistant Kelly noticed my distraction but didn't press when I brushed off her concerned questions. Late one night, as I sat alone in my apartment surrounded by work I couldn't focus on, my email pinged. It was from my mother. The subject, line family photos. The body contained only, "Thought you might enjoy these memories," with an attachment. Opening it revealed dozens of photos from a recent family gathering I hadn't been invited to. James and Rebecca with their children. My parents beaming proudly, everyone color-coordinated in navy and cream. There I was, conspicuously absent from yet another family milestone. Before I could process this, my phone lit up with a text from Rebecca. "Just wanted to share our good news. Mom and Dad are helping us with the down payment on our lake house. So blessed to have such generous parents." Something inside me shattered. I sank to the floor beside my coffee table, struggling to breathe as tears finally broke through the professional facade I'd maintained for weeks. I don't know how long I sat there before I found my phone and called Maya. The clock read 1:38 a.m., but she answered immediately. "I can't do this anymore," I sobbed. "I can't keep pretending I'm okay with being the family afterthought." Maya didn't hesitate. "I'm coming over. Don't move." 30 minutes later, she was at my door, taking in my tear-stained face and the chaos around me. I'd pulled out every family photo, every card, every tangible reminder of the relationship I'd spent, my life trying to salvage. "Oh, Liv," she whispered, sitting beside me on the floor. For hours, we talked through it all. The countless small rejections, the constant comparisons, the rewriting of history where my parents cast themselves as supportive while consistently undermining me. "You know what the worst part is?" I said as dawn began to light my apartment. "I still want them to love me. After everything, I still crave their approval like I'm 7 years old again." Maya took my hands. "That's not weakness, Liv. That's being human. But you need to ask yourself how much more of your life you're willing to sacrifice, hoping for something they're incapable of giving you." The truth of her words hit me physically. I began to hyperventilate, my heart racing so fast I thought I might be having a heart attack. Maya recognized the panic attack immediately and called an Uber to take us to the emergency room. Hours later, with medication calming my system and medical confirmation that my heart was physically fine, a doctor sat at my bedside. "Your tests show extreme stress levels," Dr. Winters explained. "This kind of sustained emotional distress can cause serious health problems if not addressed." She recommended therapy and wrote a note for work, suggesting a 2-week medical leave. I had hit rock bottom, unable to work, my body physically rebelling against the emotional weight I'd carried for decades. As Maya helped me back into my apartment, I looked around at the evidence of my unraveled life. Missed deadlines, unanswered messages, dishes in the sink from days ago, and realized something had to change. Not my parents, not my siblings, but me. For the first time, I understood with perfect clarity that waiting for my family to value me would destroy me entirely. The therapist Maya recommended, Dr. Powell, specialized in family trauma. My first session, I spent 45 minutes insisting my family wasn't that bad and that I was overreacting. Dr. Powell listened patiently, then said something that stopped me cold. "You've normalized their behavior because acknowledging how truly abnormal it is would be too painful." Over the following weeks, I began to see patterns I'd been blind to my entire life. Dr. Powell gave me books about emotional neglect and family scapegoating. I learned terms like golden child syndrome and narcissistic family systems that described my experience with uncomfortable accuracy. Initially, I resisted these labels. Surely my family didn't fit these extreme categories. But the evidence was overwhelming once I allowed myself to see it clearly. I joined an online support group for adult children of emotionally unavailable parents, reading stories that mirrored mine with eerie similarity. Gradually, I established boundaries I'd never dared before. I muted my family's social media accounts, declining to witness their picture-perfect moments that deliberately excluded me. I limited phone conversations to 15 minutes, ending calls when they became toxic. I stopped sending thoughtful gifts that went unacknowledged while expecting nothing in return. Most importantly, I began to recognize my own achievements without waiting for parental validation that never came. My apartment became a metaphor for my internal renovation. I repainted walls, replaced furniture chosen to impress others with pieces that brought me joy, and created a home office that celebrated my design accomplishments. In therapy, I wrote letters I never sent, to my younger self, to my parents, to my siblings, pouring out decades of unexpressed hurt and anger, then gradually moving toward acceptance and release. As months passed, my design work took on new depth and authenticity. I created spaces that reflected genuine comfort and personal meaning, rather than chasing trends or approval. A former client returned, amazed by my evolved aesthetic, commissioning a complete home redesign that reinvigorated my professional reputation. When Thanksgiving approached, traditionally spent performing familial harmony at my parents' house, I made different plans. Maya and her partner invited me to join their friend group's chosen family dinner. Surrounded by people who valued me, exactly as I was, I experienced holiday joy without underlying tension for the first time in memory. Sam, another friend who'd stood by me through this transformation, noticed the difference immediately. "Your shoulders aren't up around your ears anymore," he observed. "You look like you're actually breathing." I discovered new interests entirely, disconnected from my family's expectations or judgments. I took ceramics classes, joined a hiking group, and volunteered designing spaces for a women's shelter. Each new experience reinforced my identity separate from the Parker family narrative where I'd always been cast as less than. Dr. Powell's guidance helped me recognize that my worth had never been determined by my parents' inability to see it. "The child believes the parent's perspective is reality," she explained. "The adult has to learn that the parent's perspective is just that, one flawed perspective." By spring, nearly 6 months after the devastating will conversation, I barely recognized the woman who had sobbed on her apartment floor in despair. I wasn't completely healed. That would take longer than half a year of therapy could provide. But I was stronger, clearer, and finally building a life that wasn't a desperate bid for approval I'd never receive. The call about my father's health came on a Tuesday morning. Minor heart scare, my mother termed it, though her voice betrayed greater concern. "We're having a family meeting tomorrow to discuss care arrangements. I suppose you should be there." 2. The dismissive afterthought hurt less than it would have months before. I arranged coverage at work and drove to Oak Ridge, arriving at my parents' house to find Rebecca's and James's cars already in the driveway. Inside, they were gathered in the living room, James reviewing medical documents with professional authority, while Rebecca organized notes about care options. My mother hovered anxiously between them, while my father, looking paler but as stern as ever, sat in his favorite chair. No one acknowledged my arrival for several minutes. When James finally looked up, it was with surprise, as if he'd forgotten I'd been invited. "We've already outlined the care schedule," Rebecca informed me without greeting. "James will oversee medical decisions, I'll handle legal and insurance matters, and Mom will coordinate daily care." My father nodded approvingly at their efficiency. "We'll need to liquidate some investments," James continued, addressing my parents as if I weren't present. "The treatment protocol I've selected isn't fully covered by insurance." I stood silently, watching this familiar choreography where decisions were made without my input, my presence barely relevant to family functioning. But something had changed. I wasn't the same person who had accepted this dynamic my entire life. I cleared my throat, and 4 pairs of eyes turned to me with varying degrees of surprise and impatience. I'd like to contribute to Dad's care as well, I said calmly. I have skills and resources that could be valuable in this situation. Rebecca's dismissive laugh cut through the room. What exactly would you contribute, Liv? Going to redecorate Dad's recovery room? My mother made a placating gesture. Darling, James and Rebecca have this well in hand. You have your little business to worry about. Something about her condescending tone, identical to ones I'd heard my entire life, crystallized the moment. I took a deep breath and spoke with a clarity that surprised even me. For 32 years, I've accepted being treated as less valuable, less capable, and less worthy of consideration than James and Rebecca. I've made excuses for why you've consistently provided them with opportunities, financial support, and emotional validation that you've withheld from me. I convinced myself that if I just achieved enough, or if I were understanding enough of your limitations, eventually you would see me as equally deserving of your love and respect. The room had gone completely silent. James's mouth hung slightly open, and Rebecca had frozen mid-eye roll. My father's expression darkened with anger, while my mother looked nervously between family members. That ends today, I continued steadily. I'm your daughter just as much as Rebecca is. I'm your child just as much as James is. My worth isn't determined by whether I followed the career path you preferred or provided you with grandchildren on your desired timeline. I turned to my siblings. And I won't continue to accept your contempt and condescension as if I deserve it. I don't. No one deserves to be treated as perpetually inadequate by their own family. My mother attempted to interrupt with, Olivia, you're being melodramatic as usual. But I held up my hand in a gesture so uncharacteristically authoritative that she actually stopped speaking. That response, dismissing my legitimate feelings as melodrama, is exactly the pattern I'm talking about. When James expresses concerns, they're valid. When Rebecca has complaints, they're addressed. When I speak up, I'm being dramatic. Or too sensitive. I turned back to my father, whose face had flushed with either anger or embarrassment. I hope you recover quickly and completely, Dad. I'm happy to be part of your care team if you're willing to treat me with the same respect. You give my siblings. If not, I'll send well wishes from a distance that protects my mental health. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small box containing childhood trophies and ribbons I'd kept seeking their approval. Art competition medals they'd never acknowledged. Academic awards they'd dismissed as less important than James's athletic achievements. I placed it on the coffee table. I'm returning these because I don't need them anymore. I know my value now, even if you never have. Without waiting for a response, I walked calmly to the door. My mother called after me, her voice tinged with the manipulation that had always worked before. If you walk out now, you're proving exactly why we made the decisions we did. I paused at the threshold, turning back one last time. No, Mom. If you let me walk out now, you're proving exactly why I finally need to prioritize myself over a family that never prioritized me. As I closed the door behind me, I heard Rebecca's shocked voice and James beginning to argue with my parents. For the first time in my memory, I had disrupted the family system by refusing to play my assigned role. Standing on the porch of my childhood home, I took the deepest breath I'd drawn in years, filling my lungs completely without the constriction of anxiety that had been my constant companion in that house. I looked back at the imposing facade that had intimidated me for so long and felt something unexpected. Not anger or grief, but a profound sense of liberation, as if I'd finally set down a burden I was never meant to carry. 6 months passed like a dream in a lifetime. My apartment transformation had become a physical manifestation of my internal journey. Walls once beige, now vibrant with colors I'd always loved but hesitated to embrace. Furniture arranged for comfort rather than impression, and most significantly, a gallery wall featuring my design achievements alongside photos of my chosen family, friends who celebrated rather than diminished me. My business had not just recovered, but flourished, with a new focus on creating spaces that honored clients' authentic selves rather than societal expectations. I'd hired 2 new designers and moved to a larger studio space, with Maya joking that I'd needed to physically expand to accommodate my growing self-worth. Contact with my biological family continued, but on radically different terms. After my dramatic exit from the family meeting, James had surprisingly reached out first. I've never seen you stand up for yourself like that, he'd said awkwardly, over coffee. It made me realize I don't really know you at all. Our relationship remained cautious but had developed moments of genuine connection as he began to see me as a person separate from the family narrative. Rebecca proved more resistant to change, maintaining her competitive stance, though she'd stopped making openly disparaging comments about my career. My parents had cycled through predictable responses, initial angry silence, followed by attempts to re-establish the old dynamic through guilt and manipulation, then grudging adjustment to new boundaries when those tactics failed. My father's health improved, and though I wasn't central to his care as my siblings were, I contributed in meaningful ways that slowly earned a modicum of respect. My mother struggled most with our transformed relationship, alternating between performative support of my newfound confidence and thinly veiled criticisms disguised as concern. Through it all, I maintained the boundaries therapy had taught me to establish, limiting contact to what felt healthy, ending conversations that turned toxic, and most importantly, no longer measuring my worth through their estimation of it. The previous Christmas, I'd spent a miserable day performing family harmony at my parents' house despite their recent will announcement. This year, I made a mindful choice to accept their dinner invitation with clear time boundaries, bringing Maya as moral support. For 3 hours, I engaged as my authentic self rather than the placating daughter role I'd played for decades. When my mother made a typical undermining comment about my unusual holiday outfit, I neither apologized nor grew defensive. "I love this dress," I said simply. "It makes me happy." The table fell momentarily silent at this small assertion, then conversation resumed. The entire interaction represented my new approach, neither seeking approval nor fearing disapproval, simply existing comfortably as myself. Later that evening, alone in my apartment with the lights of Chicago twinkling outside my window, I wrote a final entry in the journal Dr. Powell had suggested I keep. "I've spent my life believing the greatest inheritance would be my parents' approval, their acknowledgement that I was equally worthy of their love and support. I now understand that no amount of money, property, or possessions could equal the inheritance I've given myself, the freedom to define my own worth, create my own definition of success, and build a life that honors who I truly am rather than who others wanted me to be." The journey from that devastating dinner where they announced my disinheritance to this point of peace hadn't been linear or easy. There had been setbacks, moments of falling into old patterns, days of grief for the parents I'd never had, times when standing in my truth felt lonelier than acquiescing to familiar dysfunction. But with each step toward authenticity, the path became clearer and the burden lighter. Perhaps the most profound realization was that while I couldn't change my family's perception or behavior, I could change the story I told myself. I was no longer the less valuable child, the family disappointment, the eternal outsider. I was Olivia Parker, talented designer, loyal friend, resilient woman still learning and growing. And that, not any entry in my parents' will, was the true legacy I would carry forward. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members who couldn't see your worth? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself when faced with lifelong patterns of favoritism or emotional neglect? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that your value isn't determined by others' inability to see it, and sometimes the most important inheritance we receive isn't material at all, but the freedom to define ourselves on our own terms. Thank you for listening to my story today. If it resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more journeys of healing and self-discovery. Wishing you all the strength to write your own story, independent of others' expectations.